When Kira and I were engaged, we, did what most, couples do. You go to premarital counseling, and we did so in a big group of people. And at some point, the deacon who was running the premarital counseling looked at the group and said, "How many of you think that you will be married in heaven? How many of you think you'll be married for all eternity?" And as you can imagine, of course, everyone in the room enthusiastically raised their hands, except two people, except me and Kira. So we immediately were kind of exposed as the people who seemed to not be all that excited to be getting ready to move in with one another didn't seem to be those people who really believed in that, forever kind of love. And then to top all of this off, at some point the deacon pointed at both of us and was like, "Kira and Trent, I see that you didn't raise your hands. You don't believe that you're going to be married forever. Can you tell us why?" And at that point, we then had to kind of oust ourselves as Bible nerds and then refer to the passage that we just heard. I don't know about you, but I don't know if, just like all those people in that room, I don't know if everyone, when they hear this passage read, hears really good news. Whenever we hear passages like this, if you're like me, you might think that this might strike you as not very hopeful or good at all, actually. When Jesus says there will be no marriage in heaven, we might hear him saying something like, God has come to take away everything that you currently know that is good and give you something else. And again, if you're like me, I don't really want heaven at the expense of the life that I have with Kira, really. And I want to be with God, yes, but I don't necessarily want God at the expense of everything else. And I'll be really specific. I don't want heaven at the expense of coral reefs. Things that are good, whales, forests, rivers, salmon, deer, food, and really healthy topsoils to make all that food healthy. This is the stuff that gives me joy. This is the way that I am in contact with the world, that if it is good at all, that I know that goodness. I think most of us think that the resurrection is finally about that, though, getting us out of creation, out of life, as if Jesus finally came to rid us of everything, this great big failure called history, which he started, by the way, by coming to live and die and be raised to ascend into heaven, to open up for us that little escape hatch called heaven, where, bodies float. Well, not bodies, spiritual bodies, kind of float around like a misty serum poured into a glass before the Almighty's, expansively empty self. Not good news to me. A lot of Christians think this is what happens whenever we talk about salvation, whenever we talk about life after death. We think salvation is something that happens only to our insides, transforms only our souls, captures only our hearts to finally rid us of the life of the body and all that it entails. But this isn't what Jesus is on about in this passage this morning, nor is he really just sort of taking aim at the institution of marriage or something, though it is true that in the resurrection, everything will be different. Everything is different because of the resurrection. Everything will be different in the end. In our gospel passage, the one that we just heard, we hear about a situation where Jesus is confronted by a group called the Sadducees, who oppose Jesus on the resurrection and all that it entails. It's actually kind of a silly story if you think about it, but it's also a really sad story about a woman who has a whole lot of bad things happen to her, right? It's true that she is just kind of a character in a parable. She's kind of made up. She isn't real. Still, though, even though she isn't real, I don't know about you, but my heart really goes out to her whenever I hear this passage. Now, throughout his ministry, Jesus has been making claims about his own authority over the temple, too. This is really important, which is something that all of the religious leaders at the time were fighting over. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, Jesus, the temple is amidst incredible conflict. If you're super interested in this background, you can read Maccabees. So the Sadducees are trying to kind of trip Jesus up, to kind of discredit him, so that they can then kind of assume greater authority over the temple. You might know that the Sadducees, they only accepted the first 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy. You know those ones that we love reading all the time right before we go to bed. And they didn't believe in the resurrection, because they didn't really see the resurrection reflected there. And so in this test scenario, the scenario with this widow that they bring to Jesus, it's based on a law that we find in Deuteronomy 25, where there's a law that says that if someone's brother dies without children, what they're supposed to do is to marry his wife so that then she can basically bear children for him. Someone who will then basically bear his namesake in the form of descendants, in the form of children. This is basically the closest thing that you can get to immortality without actually believing in the resurrection. Immortality via memory, immortality via children. The absurd thing then about the resurrection the Sadducees are claiming is that forces you to have to deal with like odd scenarios like this. There's this woman who was married 7 times, so in the resurrection of the dead, like, all right, Jesus, if you're right about this, like, what's the deal? Who's she going to be living with, I guess? But this is where Jesus, actually, he's really funny about this because he does appeal to descendants. It kind of makes me laugh a little bit. I'm like, man, Jesus, you're so good. Ooh, you got him. He quotes Moses, of course, a shared authority amongst them, who appeals to God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a great line of what? Descendants of children. Now you remember the promise of God to Abraham, of course, was that he might have many children, right? And that's exactly where we are to look, though. Jesus says, if you want evidence for the resurrection in the Bible, you should remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God who made that whole miracle possible in the first place. Yes, God provided a legacy to Abraham and Sarah by giving them a son, but we shouldn't forget about the God who provided that son in the first place. In their old, barren age, in their time and moment of deep disgrace, a son was given, a miraculous conception. Something was drawn from nothing. Life was drawn from death. God fulfilled that covenant through the blessing of many descendants, but what Jesus is saying is that this promise, this covenant and including its children didn't point to just more marriage and more children, but pointed to the giver of that life. It points to God. Covenant, God's promises, points to resurrection. God's relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob isn't actually over then. That's the thing. God's relationship with these 3 people are not the name of 3 dead people. They are names of people that God has a relationship with. God is not the God then of the dead and of such deadened people. Covenant points to God's everlasting faithfulness and so to life. God then deepens rather than loses his relationship with his creation, with the people who he has established a covenant with, who he has gathered to himself. He's not going to lose them. That's what Jesus is saying. Covenant points to resurrection. Okay, now remember what is actually important to the Sadducees who are testing Jesus is the temple. The temple is really central, and I think most of us are used to thinking of the temple as like just kind of like some religious architecture, you know? But if you read those books of Moses, you'll see that the temple is something much more than that. The temple actually participated in God's presence in the world. That was actually the scandal of the temple. It's where heaven like meets earth. It's where God's blessings were mediated out for the life of the people, which is pretty awesome. And because of all this, though, resting on the temple, its promises of blessing, the temple became a place of intense religious and political conflict, hence the confrontation that we're reading about. Now, Jesus' judgment against the temple establishment gets him into a lot of trouble often, but not because he's come to kind of denounce or replace it. He's not upset with the architecture. He's come to reveal the temple and its blessings and the true authority and identity of that temple and its blessings, the true one from whom they come. Jesus' authority over the temple means more than just some kind of extra details on what it means for Jesus to be called the Messiah. It means that Jesus' identity is bound up with the temple and its own destiny. In its fate, Jesus is saying he will take on himself. As we all know, the temple will be destroyed, but it will be raised with and in Jesus, because he is the embodiment of God's covenant with his people. He is the living presence of God with us. He is one in whom God's life of fullness and blessing is found and given out. And his resurrection means that blessing, that covenant, can't be stuffed out. And all of that leads us back then to this woman in the Sadducees parable. Her life without future, without hope. By all accounts, her life isn't just small. It's like a straight up dead end, you know? I know she's just a character in a parable, but nevertheless, we know such people. We identify with such people. Small, whose lives are just apparent dead ends, not going anywhere beyond hope or help. We wonder about what our lives ultimately amount to all the time. We question our worth, wonder what our efforts really stack up to. We seek all kinds of ways to secure that through success, advancing in work, becoming somebody worth remembering. This is the whole anxiety that keeps social media in business, you know? How can I make sure I'm worth something? That I won't just be replaced, forgotten. That's why this woman's example is so important. Her life, small, but also normal. All of our lives are like this in some sense. Our lives matter, though, because Jesus has come and taken them up. He has lived a human life, died and was raised. He takes up our lives just as they are, revealing them to be something open to the glory of God, something worth taking up and putting on display before the angels, he tells us. You and me, our lives. That means that not only will God's faithfulness, God's covenant endure when ours runs out. Not only will God draw life from death, but God isn't going back on his creation. The resurrection isn't God's great undo button. God is actually deepening his relationship with us, with all of his creation. And people, that is what grace means. It's not about God just forgetting. It's about deepening his relationship with us. That's what resurrection means. That's what it means for Jesus to appeal to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Eternal faithfulness where ours runs out. I don't know about all of you, But that, I think, is incredible. If you really believe in having a relationship with Jesus, if you really believe you are united with him, then you are already being made a part of this, the power of God that raised Jesus from the dead. This is what we believe. The resurrection isn't just a bit of religious dogma. It's not just something we believe. It's something that we actually participate in, the life of the church, all of us. That means God's good, not just for my soul at some other time and in some other place. It means something good for our whole lives starting now, as we've heard about and sung already. What we're talking about when we talk about resurrection, again, is God's everlasting covenant, God's unalterable, unconquerable word spoken over each of our lives, especially when we think there's just nothing more to them. It's about the power of God, which empires of the world cannot even stop or hinder. It is what makes the martyr's life triumphant rather than a sign of defeat. It's why caring for the poor is beautiful and worth doing, even if doing so does nothing to start eliminating poverty and illness. It means that we can actually afford to pursue Christ-like lives, that we can actually learn patience, that we can actually be humble and kind. Even when our enemies stand before us, we can live nonviolently. That's what resurrection means. It means that we can actually reorder our lives. We can actually reorder our institutions. It means that we can live hopefully in a world that we know the next flood is coming. It means we have been liberated from self-service. It means that we have been freed, given true freedom in Christ. We have been freed so that we can go and actually be with our neighbors. It means that we actually finally have something to say to the world. And the resurrection also means that we have time to go and share it with them, this great good news of Jesus Christ risen. It means that God is breathing joy and goodness back into the world, into you and me, especially when we have lost heart, when we have lost our way, when we have compromised our souls. That's what it means to have hope. So let us say, when we get the chance in a moment, with joy, as we do every Sunday, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. He has not abandoned us or forsaken us. It is his word and not our own that will be at the end. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, his life, victorious in us now and in the life to come. Amen.